People are slowly joining, so we'll give it another minute or so. Okay, so in wanting to honor everyone's time today, I want to offer a warm welcome to everyone in attendance to this month's I Rise and Shine Wellness Collective webinar series. Today, we will be focusing on loving the skin you're in, practice tips for self-acceptance, self-love, and self-compassion after breast cancer. In this webinar, participants will learn about the cultural context for why women struggle with body image, paired with some practical ways to learn to recognize the cultural narratives and how to shift them. We focus what body, we focus what body grief is. We focus on what body grief is, how it is showing up in our stories, and tools we can use to increase body compassion in the midst of body grief. First, I'd like to offer a warm welcome to our guest speaker, Wendy Jensen. Wendy is a licensed clinical social worker with a master's degree in social work in 2000. Upon graduation, she accepted a full-time position with a local mental health therapy clinic for 5 years, focusing on women's mental health. In 2005, she began working at the Center for Change, which is an eating disorder clinic in Orem, Utah. While there, she specialized in the treatment of individuals with eating disorders, working on all levels of care: inpatient, residential, day patient, and outpatient services. In the spring of 2012, she launched her own private practice with an emphasis on women's issues, eating disorders, body image, and anxiety. In 2017, she expanded into a group practice called Inside Wellness, with the desire to broaden the reach in helping women to accept themselves and thrive. She feels passionate about the promotion of self-compassion and body acceptance for women in all phases of life. Currently, she is serving on the board of the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals in Utah, in the Utah chapter. In her free time, you can find her in the mountains on snow skis or at the lake water skiing. So without further ado, I'd like to offer a warm welcome to Wendy. Wendy, I turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I'm so honored to be here and to be part of such a great organization and to be a part of such an important part of the season of your life that you're in and your story. And so I just want to thank Jillian and your team for allowing me to participate today. So I first wanted to start off and talk a little bit about, hang tight, I can't get it to transition to the next slide. There we go. Okay. I'd like to just talk a little bit about my way. Obviously, Jillian just gave the background of kind of how I got into my career. And so when I first started working at an eating disorder treatment facility, I started there honestly because I had a friend who worked there and I thought it would be a good next step to broaden my skill set, learn a different demographic. And as I started working there, it became very apparent to me how impactful our cultural exposure is to the, I'm going to put in quotes, beauty ideals that we all are saturated in from the time that we're born on up. And as I worked there and had to look at some of the things I had learned over the years and how I thought about and viewed bodies of all shapes and sizes, I just became incredibly passionate about wanting to help educate and promote increased body awareness and help women and men, but my practice has mostly been focused on women, learn how to love and accept themselves as they are and make peace with the bodies that we are all in. And I don't think anyone is immune from this journey. I will say that part of my why too is that as I started doing this work, I realized how buffered I had actually been from a lot of the cultural narrative growing up. My parents, I don't think it was intentional, but they did some really great things in helping me cultivate a healthy body image. And we'll talk about some of those components a little bit later in the presentation. But as a result of that, I also felt passionate about extending my reach and helping to educate and promote a different way of thinking about our bodies. So as we get started, I thought it would be helpful just to kind of get oriented on kind of what body image is. And I'm going to apologize. I might need to take a little drink. I've had a cough for several weeks now and might need a break. Okay, so when we think about body image, there's many different ways we can approach this. And, you know, if you have questions as we roll through, you're welcome to put them in the chat box and Jillian will let me know when they're coming up. I'm accustomed to doing presentations at retreats or in a full day seminar, those types of things. So I'm trying to kind of just pack down some of the basics so we can kind of be oriented on the same page and get to some tools that could be helpful. But feel free to throw out any questions as you have them. So body image can be explained in many different ways, but I think the simplest way that we could go about it for today is how we see ourselves. So that can be the visual perception when we look in the mirror. That can be through the lens of what we have experienced in our bodies, what other factors kind of have impacted like our concept of beauty. It comes down to how we feel about how we see or experience ourselves. Because there's a visual perception and then there's also that internal dialogue that happens about that. And then just also in general, how we define ourselves. Sometimes usually we have, like if we were to have an identity wheel and we were to do like a pie chart of the different parts of who you are, there could be multiple facets of how we would identify ourselves. That for someone that could be, roles. So like I'm a daughter, I'm a mom, I'm an athlete, I'm a writer. It can have a whole host of different things about us, one of which would be our appearance. And so sometimes it depends on how much that part is a part of our identity. And there are a lot of factors that kind of culminate into what impacts that as well. So just we'll call it body image 102. Is the second component is how others view or experience our bodies. And then how you think and feel about how other people view your body. What emotions come up for you in that situation or when you feel like other people are viewing you. And then what behaviors, actions or inactions does that lead one to do? So that could be compensation behaviors, that could be behaviors that, I can go out in public dressed as I am with no makeup, or it could be I feel like I have to present myself in specific ways. I have to exercise. I don't need to exercise. There's just a lot of factors that come up depending on kind of those emotions and feelings that surface based on how you feel like other people view you. And a lot of that comes back to exposure of what I'm, putting in parentheses as our beauty ideals. And you don't need to read this through. I'll just read actually each point of these because I think it's just worth taking a look at. So as we take a look back on the history of body image, it's always an evolving topic. So, and it's always culturally defined. And so if something is culturally defined, it usually means it's going to shift over time. So this just gives us a great example. So in the Renaissance era, fair skin was the ideal, a round stomach, a full bust, and full hips were viewed as like the ideal body type of the day. In the Victorian England era, it was full figured, cinched waist, corsets came on scene then, but the idea is that you should be fuller figured and larger, but with than the cinched corset. In the Roaring 20s, flat chest, boyish figure, short hair. Hollywood was hourglass figure or a full figure, but with a small waist. By the time we hit the 60s, the look was adolescent physique. In the 80s, it was athletic figure, but you were still supposed to be busty. In the 90s, it was a waifish and extremely thin look. And from 2000 to today, it's supposed to be large butt, large bust, small or athletic everywhere else. And as you can see, as we take a look at these, literally not one person could be all of those things over time, because they're all very contradicting in different body types and styles. And we all come genetically predisposed to certain body shapes, sizes, heights, widths, all the different things. And so trying to chase this ideal of beauty is really futile, because there's no way you can actually be all of the things. Also, I think it also is pretty tough to try to define yourself and pivot to like a cultural narrative that always kind of perpetuates the ideal that however you are isn't enough. I'm going to show a video. It's not a new video, but I just think it's a quick little refresh about kind of how the media takes our image from who we are and shifts it. So we'll just watch this 1 minute clip. And recording sound. Okay, so, I know a lot of people have already seen that, but I still think it was worth seeing, because while we know that photoshopping happens, it doesn't mean that every time we walk into a grocery store or wherever we're at and we see a magazine, that's the first thing that comes to our mind. And certainly for all of us who have littles in our lives that we love and care about, as they're growing up, that isn't the first thing that they always see when they see someone that they idealize as, someone that's popular in the music industry or in a movie that they like, or whatever the case may be. It's they automatically shift into a comparison mode of, I want to look like that, or a belief set that that's how bodies are supposed to be. The interesting thing with photoshopping that is not always commonly known is that they actually Photoshop people's like different body parts. So even in a magazine, if you see someone, it could not be their arms or their legs. They Photoshopped in other people's arms or legs. Into that, in moving film, they can actually do the same type of thing where they can actually image shop, I guess is what we'll call that, in to add on different heights to people, different body parts. And so even when we're watching someone in live film, it doesn't mean that's their actual body. And it's such a normal part of the industry that when people have actually tried to sue, Katie Couric has tried to sue, Jennifer Aniston has tried to sue, stating that they did not give consent for their bodies to be reduced by a few sizes or modified in various ways in an image in a magazine that they consented to be on the cover for. They haven't been able to win those lawsuits because it's just normal part of the industry that's what people should expect. which I find is super fascinating and very disturbing because it's their bodies and they were giving consent to participate, and yet they can't even measure up to how they actually look in real life. So it's no wonder that we start to get very distorted ideas in our head about how we should look. There's a few different studies actually with different ages, from ages 4 to 9, and I think 7 to 11, where children are more fearful of being in an undesirable body than losing a limb or getting cancer. And that one just breaks my heart every time I see it and read it. And these studies have been done in various settings, but it just comes back to speaking to the idea that how our cultural exposure, like when it starts and how powerful it is, has such impact on ourselves and the minds of children that we love, that they have fears that an undesirable body is worse than these other things. In most movies or TV shows, at least historically, there's some things that are starting to change in the last few years, but character portrayal is really associates the thin ideal with certain desirable characteristic traits of success or like positive relationships, things working out for them. And more diverse bodies that don't meet up the thin ideal tend to have the characters in shows and movies that don't have those same positive associations. Obviously, through the media, our sexual identity becomes shaped through these lenses, and there are a lot of double standards in this area. For example, as women and men age in the movies or in the media, men have a lot of positive descriptors associated with their hair going gray or their aging, and women, it's usually stated with like a clause like, oh, she looks really good for her age. And so there's just a lot of double standards that exist. And I'm not suggesting that body image isn't a struggle that men have, because certainly they have been targeted as well. But women's number one shame trigger, according to some of Brene Brown's research, is that our number one shame trigger is body image, and that men's number one shame trigger is associated with their ability to provide. And so obviously we've received a lot more of the targeting from the media and for products promoting beauty standards and such at a much higher level than men have. And there's a fascinating study that was done in the 90s in Fiji, and they studied that country and kind of did some assessments on eating disorder behaviors, body satisfaction scores and such. And basically before Western TV was introduced, there were like almost no reported incidents of any type of eating disorder behaviors. Body satisfaction wasn't, like negative body satisfaction wasn't really reported. And after 3 years of exposure to Western TV, 11% of all girls had engaged in at least one eating disorder behavior and reported a significant decline in body satisfaction. And so I think that was really, when I learned that when I was doing eating disorder treatment, I was really taken aback, because just thinking about just 3 years of exposure and how that could have such a significant impact and shift, where prior to that time, the lack of that exposure really didn't affect their sense of self and their body image. Okay, so there's a lot of things that go into kind of how we get to a place where we have different beliefs about body image outside of the media. The media is definitely one huge impact, but we want to look at cultural influences. And so when I say that, I'm just talking about like kind of where in the community you were raised in, what were some of the values that you learned from your community? In my community, we learned hard work. I learned service for your neighbor. There's lots of values that anyone can have learned. So I just want you to kind of think about what your community taught you. What practices did you learn from your community? in terms of actions or behaviors towards self and others. What body types were you exposed to? Were the demographics similar in nature or diverse groups of peoples or bodies? The reason why that one matters is because the research indicates that the more we are exposed to a wide variety of individuals, cultures, body types, the more acceptance we tend to have and the more normalization we have about that all bodies can be acceptable. The less exposure we have, then we tend to have a more narrow comparative approach. In that broader community, what body beliefs did you hear? And these things could have been either blatantly stated or were kind of covertly like infused into conversations or different environments that you were in. So did you learn to trust your body or to distrust your body? Did you learn that your body could be self-regulating or that you needed to control your body? Did you learn that exercise should be a form of enjoyment, or was it used as punishment or a compensation tool for food or your body shape and size? Same thing with family culture. Although this one I want you to we're going to take a little bit more time on this one to kind of give you a second to kind of think through, like, what were some of your family values? I'm just going to give you a minute to think about that. What was the type of humor that your family engaged in, enjoyed, tolerated, or didn't tolerate? What types of comparisons, if any, existed in your family? That could be, comparisons to needing to do the same types of activities that people in your neighborhood or community did, or have similar experiences, be that through, travel or participation in sports or whatever the cases may be. What were the body types in your family, your immediate family, and your extended family? And how did your body either align with that or not align with the other body types in your family? What was the emphasis on appearance? What were maybe any health risks in your family or beliefs about health practices or health factors? What were some of the expectations as to how to dress, how to look, or to present oneself in various settings? What was your family genetic construct? And this could be different depending on different sides of your family and different genetic makeups. Did your family experience or members of your family have thin privilege? Did people experience fat phobia or marginalization because of their body shape or size, or was there diversification of both? So as we kind of sit with that for just a minute, from your family of origin, what did you learn about body beliefs? Were you taught to trust your body in terms of its need for rest, its need for food intake, food type, when to eat, how much to eat, when to be done? Or did you learn to distrust your body? Did you learn that your body could be self-regulating when it comes to hunger and fullness, and when it comes to same thing like energy and rest and movement as enjoyment versus like exercise needing to be something that you had to do to try to control your body shape and size, or as a punishment? So circling back to kind of my why on this front. One of the reasons why I'm passionate about doing this work is because as I started doing the work, I realized that my family of origin actually was a buffer from some of these components. So we definitely had expectations about how we had to dress for certain circumstances. So if we were going to, let's just say like a religious community event, we had to dress to the standards of the expectation that was there. Or when we were going to school, we had to go with whatever the school dress code was, which I think in my school is we couldn't wear sweats. So we had to be dressed appropriately for, high school or whatever school. But if I was going to the grocery store, for example, there was zero expectation about how I needed to look for that, so long as I had on just appropriate clothing to go to the grocery store. My parents weren't I don't remember them ever talking about appearance, to be honest. My mom wasn't into makeup. There's nothing wrong with makeup. I'm just stating she really wasn't. So for me, I was kind of buffered from some of those factors. I definitely learned to trust my body. We won't dive into a concept called intuitive eating that we discuss in eating disorder world, but it's basically learning to trust that your body can give you the signals for hunger and fullness. And when comments, there was only one time I can think of an external comment being made to me, and it was by my grandma, who I never had known her to be appearance-based or concerned really about much. But when she was staying with us one time, I was after swim practice and I was very hungry. And then during swim season, my appetite would change significantly. And I was going back for my second or third helping of something that we had that night. And my grandma said, and it surprised me, but she said to my dad, Max, are you going to let her eat that much? And my dad just kind of looked at her like, why would you ask that question? He's like, yeah, absolutely. Like, she's in swim season and she always needs to eat a lot more during that time frame. She's fine. And I don't think in the moment that stuck out to me as a big deal. But when I started doing eating disorder treatment and started looking at how culture and family culture affects our sense of self, that example came to my mind really quickly that, wow, like I did have some significant buffers in my life to help me learn to trust my body and to not put my identity heavily based in that. And I realized that I was very fortunate on that front because that is not most people's experience. And we also didn't have a lot of media exposure growing up. My parents didn't like us to watch very much TV, so I really was kind of buffered from a lot of those things. And so, like I say, I'm only sharing that because I do feel like there are things that we can do to help ourselves over time in terms of our exposure and unpack some of our beliefs. That said, even with those buffers that I had, I definitely still was exposed to the overall cultural narratives of the media and community cultures. So then we move on to circles of influence. And so by that, I mean, like outside of the larger community and family, like where were your exposure points? Were you on sports teams? Did you have coaches or music teachers or anyone that you interface with outside of when you're with your family? What is your environment like with your coworkers? What about your friends? What about your medical providers? All of these people can approach these same things in ways that can either help you feel more comfortable and accepted in the skin you're in, or can make you feel more hyper aware or hyper vigilant or anxious about how your body looks. So same thing, going back again, just taking a look at those areas of body beliefs and how those have been impacted by those circles of influence. Okay, so words matter. And the reason why I say that is because there's actually some science behind that. I mean, I think we all understand that words matter, but emotions from a scientific sense, emotions love themselves. So what it means is if we start to feel one emotion, let's say sad for argument's sake, and let's pretend it's at the top of the hill, a small snowball, and it get kicked, it will just roll down that hill and pick up more and more momentum and more snow until it kind of hits the bottom of the hill and levels out. Right. And so we don't tend to notice this with positive emotions because positive emotions are enjoyable. But with uncomfortable emotions, or what we might call negative emotions, that's where language really can affect how our mood kind of plays out. So judgment language, I always explain to people, is like opening Pandora's box of emotions. And so if we use a word that's a critical judgment, it takes our emotion from right here and it just kind of expands like a big plume cloud, just goes up and gets significantly worse. So when we elevate others' bodies or we put down our own bodies, it does change our mood and beliefs over time. Research shows that negative body talk has a ripple effect. And what they mean by that is some of the research is based in is if a group of individuals get together and one or two people make negative comments about their bodies, either a guilt comment about something they ate in their body or just dissatisfaction with their body, what happens is that other people in the group quickly jump in on that conversation. And sometimes even people who might be feeling okay about their bodies still feel the need to have to put their bodies down in order to not make other people feel bad. But usually I think it does, it just starts kind of a comparison frenzy of stepping into this pattern of body criticism. And I kind of explained to people, I said, body criticism conversations is kind of like gossip. I don't feel like anyone ever walks away feeling better for having that conversation. And so what I would try to challenge you to do is to try to go maybe one day or 1 week without commenting on bodies and just see what comes up for you. And I want to say making no comments, no positive comments, no negative comments out loud about anyone's body, especially your own. And for some people that may not be that hard because maybe the culture you were exposed to or how you've made intentional like efforts to not engage in that way. And other people like recognize, wow, like people really around me do talk about this a lot. And I always state that if I make it, when I'm talking to my clients with eating disorders, I'm like, if I make it through 3 or 4 days where I don't hear someone make a comment about feeling guilty about a food they ate as connected to their like value or their body or criticizing their body, it's often because I'm at a eating disorder conference with my eating disorder colleagues. Because it just is so prevalent in our culture. And I would have said that's not true until I started doing eating disorder work. And then I was like, oh my gosh, it is literally everywhere. And it's just such commonplace that we don't even notice that it happens. Okay, other factors that can impact our body image is temperament. And what I mean by temperament is, and we'll kind of talk about some of this a little bit more next week when we do a deeper dive into intimacy and body image, but temperament does have an impact on just kind of how we view the world. So there's 2 types of temperaments. In my opinion, I feel like people kind of come out hardwired one direction or the other. But the good news is you can learn to shift your thinking patterns. So guilt-based thinkers, when they do something that they view as out of alignment with their values, or if they make a mistake, or if there's something they don't like about themselves, they tend to think about it as a behavior or a part of them. Where shame-based thinkers, if they do something bad or they make a mistake or they view a part of themselves that they don't like, be it an attribute or a part of their bodies, they feel like they are bad. So just a quick little example of how Brene Brown explains this, because I'm taking this from her research, is she always says, you know, if people go out with their colleagues on a Thursday night and someone they drink too much, and you wake up, you sleep through a morning meeting that was important, and you wake up realizing that you missed your alarm. A guilt-based thinker will think something like this: oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. That was a bad decision. I can't do that again. I need to make amends at work, and rolling forward, I won't go out on a weeknight and go drinking, or I will only drink, a certain amount. A shame-based thinker will wake up and have thought patterns such as, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. I suck. I'm an awful person. Everyone's going to hate me. I'm such a failure. And then the narrative just continues to spiral south. So guilt is about behavior or part of something, and shame-based thinking is about who we are. And so when that comes to body image and exposure, guilt-based thinkers tend to, by and large, have I feel like a little bit easier time navigating through body image difficulties. They still have them, but shame-based thinkers tend to be much more impacted by kind of those cultural influences and tend to internalize the messages about exercise, food, body shape, and size at a deeper level, and can have more negative internal narratives around that. Other factors is food and exercise messages paired with body shape and size, which we kind of already talked about before, but that's if you've learned that if the only way to remain at this body shape and size is to do these behaviors versus I can trust my body and my genetics know how to care for me as long as I'm honoring my body's needs and having a healthy relationship with food and exercise. Then the other aspect is a frequency of negative body talk of those people around you. So like I say, growing up, I wasn't really exposed to negative body talk of people around me. I can't remember my parents ever commenting on anyone's appearance really at all. It just wasn't a thing. But in most scenarios, we do hear people talk about that. One common thing is we see people talk about if people lose weight or gain weight, that people will talk about that either to them directly or about them. And that can be very damaging because it's reinforcing. If someone loses weight and people compliment on that, then it's reinforcing that, okay, I value you more at a lower weight. And there was one article produced by a company that does a lot of research in this. And it was by a woman who had a medical issue and her weight declined over time. And she said she always had felt fine about her body before that, but then people started complimenting her as her weight went down. And then she said, because it went down for medical reasons, when it went back up, then she started having a lot of negative chatter around her body image because she'd received all this messaging that people were reinforcing that she looked better when her weight was declining. So those types of things definitely have impact. And so that kind of hits on the last point of the type of comments made towards others, both positively or negatively, about body shape and size. One of my favorite quotes by Brene Brown is, owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing we'll ever do. And so with that, I want us to look at our internal narrative. So let's circle back to the questions that were posted in the newsletter. I think I asked, what were 3 negative narratives that you held about your body before cancer? What are your current narratives about your body right now? So Brene Brown calls an internal narrative an SFD. The term she uses with children is stormy first draft. With adults, she uses a different S word. I'll let you fill in the blank there because I don't know if you have littles around you. But I just call it SFDs for short. So the thing with SFDs is when something happens, our brain has to actually have an internal dialogue about what just happened. The problem is it doesn't have to be accurate. It just has to make sense to us. So I had a client years ago in eating disorder treatment, and she was very, very assertive, often aggressive. And her internal belief is that everyone hates me. So one day I'm like walking through the area where the dining room, and it's a very big dining room. She's sitting over in this corner. I'm over here almost walking out when all of a sudden she like starts yelling and cussing someone out who's like right over by where I was at. I was like, whoa. So I grab her and I take her with me into another room, and I was like, what just happened? And she said, she gave me a look, and I just knew she hated me. And I was like, how did you come up with that? Right. And so, and her response was aggressiveness, which in this case actually did kind of contribute to reinforcing this negative belief that she had. So in that case, I just walked her through, okay, what were 3 other things that could have been happening for this person? Yes, her facial expression wasn't like seemed off, and I had her describe that to me, but given how far apart you were, like what were 3 other reasons? And so came up with 3 other reasons as to what could have been the explanation. And then over the next 2 weeks, I had her write down, anytime someone gives you a look or there's a tone or says something you think that they hate you, I want you to write down 3 other explanations. And I would encourage you guys that you could do this too. And over time, as she would write down 3 alternative explanations, and one could be funny, just, teens, and sometimes a little humor goes a long way. I want you to come up with other reasons. And over those next few weeks, that narrative started to shift. And as it shifted, she actually was less reactive, right? Because that was part of the problem, is she would kind of explode. She thought people hated her. And as she started to be less reactive, then she actually was able to connect more to people and start to feel more at home in her environment, to feel more accepted and included, which also then helps soften the belief. So I think it's always worth looking at like what it is, knowing that we are going to have that internal narrative, but it often aligns with our fears or insecurities or our negative critical thoughts, right? And so it's always worth looking at and challenging. So I just wanted us to kind of take a look at for a second is like, has your SFD changed over the time from when you were diagnosed and treated for cancer? And has it gotten better or worse? And maybe if in the chat box, people could type either just better or worse about their internal dialogue about their body image. And Jillian can kind of give me the general consensus. And I know it's a kind of an odd question, but I'm curious just kind of what the responses are.
So far we have worse by far, better.
Okay. Yeah, I would, and the reason I ask that, because oftentimes, for what we'll get into some body grief in just a second, oftentimes it makes sense to me that with breast cancer or any type of illness, that body image narratives get worse. Occasionally they get better because sometimes it strips away some of the things that were like your biggest fears. And sometimes it can free people up to shift into a different narrative, but more times than not, it gets worse before it gets better. So because we were just kind of talking about that, and also because part of the goal of this seminar is to teach us some skills, is I want us to take a quick compassion break, because sometimes thinking about those narratives can be really overwhelming. So we want to kind of zoom out so you don't get stuck. So I just want you to check in with your body right now and just see where you're feeling any discomfort. And then I want you to just breathe out with me. Take a deep breath in. Breathe out again. And I want you to just clasp your hand like this and put your hand on your heart. And just breathe in again. And out. Just acknowledging the pains of the past hurts and the difficulty of those beliefs. Because self-judgments and SFDs are some of the most painful things we can experience. And we all need empathy, connection, and compassion when our inner critic is just working on overtime. And so that we don't get stuck in that ongoing narrative. Another quote by Brene Brown says, when we have the courage to walk into our story and own it, we get to write the ending. And that's from her book called Rising Strong. So to that question, I just want you to kind of think is your body your friend, your foe, or your frenemy? And oftentimes we don't think about our body as a relationship, but we do have a relationship with our body, right? And in all relationships are not perfect, but most relationships can be worked on. Obviously, if a relationship is abusive, that is a different story, right? But even if our internal critic is verbally aggressive or abusive, I still argue that can be worked on, because that's the bulk of the work I do with my eating disorder clients. What's one word you'd use to describe your relationship with your body right now? And then what would you like it to be? And I'm going to talk through a couple examples quickly of some options. So I want your body image. I want you to have the story ending you want. So there's a couple different ways we can approach body image, and one is body positivity. And so that would be viewing your body where you feel like very positive and you want to feel and view your body as positive in terms of its appearance. One is body neutrality, and that is where you can approach your body and your appearance from a state of neutrality. It neither like makes or breaks your sense of self, and you try to actually intentionally approach it neutrally so that it can have less power. The other one is body acceptance. And the last one I think is the most like practical one, because it's more of a practice, is body compassion or befriending your body. And there's not a right or wrong answer, because this is a complex issue with a lot of backstories, and that sometimes can depend on how much your identity, like how your body image was before cancer, how much your body image was centered in your ability to perform, and then the history and cultural components we discussed prior to this. So even though I'm a therapist, sometimes I still hate that this is true, that the only way out of our feelings is to walk through them. So I want to kind of talk through body grief. So body grief, well, let's just talk about the 6 stages of grief very briefly. I'm sure you're all very familiar with this as you went through being diagnosed with cancer, of going through the shock and denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. The last phase is a newer phase that was just introduced recently, and that's finding meaning. And that usually comes much farther down the road for most people. So I just wanted to kind of orient you to those and have you think through like kind of what that was like when you're diagnosed. Body grief happens both inside and outside of illness. And so body grief can be based in not measuring up to this cultural ideal or the idea in your mind's eye of how your body should look. It could be grief and loss about how your body looked at a different age or stage. A lot of times I'll hear women say, oh, I just wish my body looked like it did when it was, blank age. Obviously with illness, in this case with breast cancer, your body before cancer treatments and surgeries, and the emotional pain and grief in those losses. And then body functionality, so the inability to participate in certain activities with ease, such as intimacy. And when I say with ease, obviously I'm just talking even mental ease, without having triggers there. And then time, energy, and experiences that maybe you've missed out on because of how your body has or hasn't functioned, or the time spent in doing treatments and such. So I want us to come back and just kind of look at that once again through these stages. Like, what for you does body grief look like in the shock and denial phase? And these aren't linear phases, we go in and out of them. Anger, that one often is like a lot of body betrayal, is feeling anger towards your body that it did not function and that it became diseased. bargaining can be that like really, and this probably happened maybe a little bit more like pre-treatment and surgeries, I would guess, where you're trying to really find a way out of having to go through what's about to come. And then depression also comes with working towards acceptance, because no one wants to accept their body as different than it has been in the past. Especially when, body image from a cultural standpoint is such a social pressure for women. And so much loss about the changes in your breast and your body and your hair and all that goes with that. And then finding meaning. And I would say finding meaning on this one, I would say Jillian's done a beautiful job of with this organization and providing community and really taking her experiences and trying to make the world a better place and create community for people walking on this path. So the walk of self-compassion to me is kind of the way that we get through body grief and body image challenges. And self-compassion is to literally just suffer together. Kristen Neff says she doesn't see a difference in self-compassion for self and others, so that she views them the same. So I think for most people, they find it easier to be more compassionate towards other people than themselves. So I always state, do what I call the best friend test. So if your best friend just told you something that happened or how they're feeling about their body during cancer treatment, after cancer treatment, prior to wanting to be intimate with your partner, and they shared those feelings that came up, what would you honestly say to them? Because often we actually have all the answers inside of us of what we intuitively would say to someone that we loved and cared about. It's a lot harder to apply that to ourselves, but it's a great way to actually get a more honest answer and to access some compassion in yourself, is to pose just that best friend test. If my best friend was feeling this, what would I actually say to provide comfort to her or him? Okay, so there's 3 components of self-compassion. We'll just get on this quickly because we're getting towards the end of the presentation, but Kristen Neff describes self-compassion as self-kindness as opposed to self-judgment. So kindness isn't just, she says, isn't just fluffy. It's an active way that we want to alleviate, understand, and comfort ourselves. Self-compassion is common humanity over isolation. So framing your experience in the context of humanity. And I think with breast cancer, I would say framing it in the context of your community and shared experiences, and mindfulness over identification. So turning towards our suffering so that we can, so we can label it and be present in the moment so we can nurture our way through it. Okay, so when it comes to body compassion, it's some steps would be honoring our body's needs for rest, comfort, movement, kind words. So what is an action that maybe you could take today along those lines? Body humanity would be recognizing that all bodies are imperfect, normalizing our experiences and challenging the beliefs that your pre-cancer body was better than now versus different. And I know this one is a painful walk and it may take a long time to get there, but that comes back to that language piece that we have some of those judgments that something is like certain bodies are better versus other bodies versus just different, and seeking support in your community. I would also say I love Jillian's background of all the different types of breasts, because I think just that is a way of that body humanity is also looking in the broader context of being exposed to more body types, and in this case, breast types, because that helps normalize our experiences as well. And body connection is slow down, pay attention, and try to enjoy what your body can bring to you in the moment. So maybe in the midst of grief about your body and how it looks, it's okay, what can I see? What can I hear? What can I smell and experience outside of what my losses are? What body compassion is not is body judgment. We kind of talked about that. Body isolation, so like avoiding events or clothing or intimacy due to some of the narratives Body over-identification look like obsessing and ruminating about how our bodies look, not being able to be present in the moment. And all these patterns are very common and very normal and can soften, shift, and change over time. So we'll hit a couple practical tips. I want you to try to practice to talk to your body as if she or they are listening, because I believe that our body does hear everything that we say. And if we think like, would I say this to someone I loved and cared about, then we probably should try to soften or shift or try to not say those things to ourselves. Comparisons come up a lot in general with body image. Certainly, I would think in the wake of breast cancer, it would be more intensified. But I recently heard someone say that when comparison shows up, it's often an indicator of an area where we need compassion for ourselves. So when you get into comparisons, I would say, get curious, like what brought that up and how can I give myself some self-compassion? Or if I'm struggling to get self-compassion, how can I call a friend who can provide me with some empathy and compassion? Write a grief letter to your body about those different phases of grief and where you're at. Sometimes it really helps to offload anger that you have towards your body, to offload the feelings of sadness that you're feeling about the losses with your body. But follow that up with a letter of compassion to your body. And you can just write like, dear body, like, and just, I want to thank you for whatever that might come up for there, and honor the hard, painful things you've been through. And body grief is a journey. I feel like body compassion is always our guide. Just a couple more things. And we'll unpack some more things next week, but the mood mirror means wherever our mood is before we look in the mirror is often going to affect what we see. So if I'm in a good mood and I look in the mirror, I'm more likely to have positive or neutral thoughts coming back at me. If my mood is off that day for reasons related to work or other things that have surfaced, our brains naturally go into more of a critical mode when our mood is dysregulated. And so then that's going to impact our body image. So one way too, I always tell my clients is to kind of back up the truck. Like if you have a negative body thought, I want you to also say, and what else was I feeling before I had a critical body thought, and see if the mood was off beforehand. The and skill. So this one is just allowing two truths to coexist. So you can experience body grief and like to feel really lost and sad and angry about what you're missing, and feel really grateful at the same time for the things that you still can do and experience with the people in your lives and in your body. You can have both body acceptance, that this is how my body looks now. So one client describes this as acceptance is it sucks and it is. I was like, well said. Like acceptance, and I can accept how my body is, and I have moments of feeling resentful or sad or whatever that you're feeling. Oftentimes we think it's one or the other, and just using the word and I always put it in big capital letters, gives us a freedom and permission to embrace the multiple sets of emotions that we all experience that are often simultaneously. And then shifting some, paying attention to the impact of the media, and then observing and trying to change the narratives. And so I think healing relationships takes time, effort, and love, but I always believe that body compassion is worth taking, and you can in time improve how you talk to yourself and talk to your body and improve your body image. And with that, I know we're almost at time, so I'll turn it over for any questions, unless we need to wrap it up right now.
I have a question, Wendy.
Yes.
I really appreciate this presentation. I mean, I think there's on so many levels, this is like, it really, I think for me, breast cancer really brought to the surface maybe insecurities that I had, and ways I viewed my body that I didn't really realize I had prior to this.
Yeah,
And
for
so
sure.
I've spent some time working through these things. But one thing that really stood out to me from the beginning of the presentation is that, many of us young women in this program are young mothers.
Mhm.
And I'm always trying to be, me personally, trying to be aware of messages that I'm sending to my kids about all sorts of things.
Sure.
And so I'm wondering if you can offer some tips or some advice on how to approach parenting to help nurture, healthy body images with our children, not only just for girls and how they perceive their own bodies, but for boys and how they not only how they perceive their bodies, but also how they um, view what a beautiful woman is.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's a huge question. And I mean, I think about this sort of thing all the time.
Sure. And we could definitely do a full presentation on that. But a short answer or a couple tips I would just say for the sake of time for today is I would say the research shows that girls get complimented on their appearance and boys get complimented on what they're doing by and large. And so, and it's not that someone said, well, can I not like compliment my children on their appearance? And I said, well, of course you can, but you don't want that to ever be the center of focus. You always want to be providing your children, particularly daughters, about what they're good at, the attributes you value in them.
Mm.
And that the comments about their body, if you're like, if you're just we're just like, oh, you're beautiful, that you state that when they've got bedhead and when they're dressed up ready to go somewhere, that it's like equally across the board. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
um and then, so you said you want to ask about, could you just restate the question, because there was one other thought I had. Jillian, can you just tell me the question one more time?
Oh, sorry. Well, yeah, so how do we as we're trying to direct them, and I guess sometimes when you're saying, when in your presentation, I was catching things that I might actually do unintentionally. So now I'm going to be super aware of myself. But, and I guess that goes back to what you were saying about like, how were we raised and what sort of messages did we receive that became sort of internalized and how we view our bodies. And so I guess the second part of that is, I have a girl and a boy. And how do I raise, what are some tips or some things that I can kind of do so that my boy realizes that, it's girls' bodies are beautiful in all sorts of ways,
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, thank you. So I would say one thing, like when you see other people, it's, and I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think it's something that's worth pausing, is when you see people, is just to state how good it is to see them, not to comment on how they look. I think we're just in a pattern of like, oh, it's so good to see you, look so good. And it can be well intended, like someone might mean like, especially like if they've been coping with illness, like that they're looking more energized, right? Or the coloring, seems like they're back, or their mood seems like they're feeling better. But to really just comment on the value of the person. It's so good to see you. To like not comment about weight loss or weight gain. Most people don't comment on weight gain, but not to compliment on weight loss. And then kind of just when you hear negative messages that show up in a family conversation, maybe with the extended family, that when you come back home, you talk about it. Someone says that this is how we view all people. All bodies are valuable. All bodies are there's beauty in diversity, and keep that broader construct. Does that make sense? And like I said, we could do a whole unpack that as well and do a presentation on that. But I would say give yourself grace, because I feel like moms in general just have so many things to worry about and so much mom guilt that when I do these presentations, I'm always a little hesitant because I don't want to add to that. but I want to give you some tools to help as you address your stuff. It kind of translates out. And the good things with kids is whatever they've learned, as you change your approach, they follow suit. They pick up on the nuances and cues that you make in the language choices and the way you talk about bodies and people. And then they just kind of come along with that.
Yeah.
So trust yourselves. That's what I would say.
Thank you for that.
Welcome.
Does anybody have any questions they want to put in the chat box that I can share?
While you're doing that, I'm just going to kick to the last page because it just has a couple additional resources that people wanted to take a look at some other body image stuff.
And maybe after this, Wendy, you can share this and I can make sure that these additional resources get into our newsletter. Perfect. Yeah. Okay, nobody has any questions. So it's past 1 o'clock already. But Wendy will be coaching us on next Tuesday, which is the 16th. I'm losing track of my days. 15th?
15th.
So, I mean, if you have questions that you want to ask leading up to then, think about those and bookmark them and we'll discuss them then. So thank you so much, Wendy. This was perfect. It was so great. So much to think about moving forward. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.